John Quincy Adams was born on July 11, 1767, in Braintree, Massachusetts, into a family of remarkable influence. His father, John Adams, was a key figure in the American Revolution and later the second President of the United States. His mother, Abigail Adams, was a woman of intellect and wisdom, deeply involved in the political and moral life of the young nation. From the very beginning, John Quincy's life was intertwined with the ideals of liberty, justice, and duty to country. Growing up during the turbulent years of the American Revolution, young John Quincy Adams was shaped by a deep sense of responsibility and a commitment to the public good. His early education was in the halls of Europe, where his father's diplomatic duties took him across the continent. It was there that John Quincy's intellectual journey truly began, laying the foundation for his later career in diplomacy, politics, and public service. As you listen to his story unfold, let the steady passage of time and the calm unfolding of his life guide you. From his early days in Massachusetts to his final years as a congressman, let the quiet continuity of his journey soothe you. If you find comfort in these stories, feel free to like, subscribe, and share where you're listening from. For now, simply drift with the life of John Quincy Adams. John Quincy Adams' early years were shaped by the American Revolution, a time of great upheaval and promise for the young nation. Born in 1767, he was only 8 years old when the revolution began, and much of his childhood was marked by the uncertainty and political ferment that surrounded him. His father, John Adams, was deeply involved in the revolutionary cause, playing a prominent role in advocating for independence from Britain. As a result, young John Quincy grew up in an environment steeped in the ideals of liberty, freedom, and self-determination. The political climate during John Quincy's early years was charged with tension. The American colonies were in the midst of their struggle for independence, and the world was watching closely. His father's involvement in the Continental Congress and the drafting of the Declaration of Independence meant that John Quincy was privy to discussions about the future of the country. Yet despite his proximity to history, his early life was filled with a quiet kind of unease. The idea of revolution was not just an abstract political ideal for John Quincy. It was a living reality that affected his family's daily life. John Quincy's mother, Abigail Adams, was equally influential in his upbringing. She was a woman of great intellect and a keen political mind, offering him guidance that would stay with him throughout his life. Although she was often separated from her husband due to his political duties, Abigail made sure that her children were educated in both the classics and the values of the new American Republic. She was particularly concerned with fostering in John Quincy a sense of responsibility, integrity, and duty toward his country. Despite the intellectual richness of his home, John Quincy's childhood was not without hardship. His father's work required him to be away frequently, leaving John Quincy and his siblings in their mother's care. This created a sense of independence in John Quincy at an early age, though it also deepened his awareness of the challenges that come with public life. He was not sheltered from the strains that came with his family's position. Instead, he was made to understand the sacrifices that both of his parents made for their country. In 1778, when John Quincy was just 11 years old, his father was sent to France as a diplomat to negotiate vital support for the American cause. John Quincy, with his family, was forced to leave their home in Massachusetts to join him in Europe. This marked the beginning of a new chapter in his life, one where he would be introduced to the political world of Europe, which would profoundly influence his future path. During this time, he was exposed to a range of political philosophies and diplomatic practices that would later inform his work as a diplomat. The family's move to France was not an easy one. The journey was long and the financial strain was great, but the intellectual rewards were considerable. John Quincy found himself in the heart of revolutionary Europe, an environment where the ideals of liberty and independence were not just abstract ideals, but movements that were actively reshaping nations. In Paris, John Quincy received a first-hand education in diplomacy and the arts of statecraft. He observed the negotiations between European powers and learned how delicate and difficult it could be to represent one's country while balancing the interests of other nations. John Quincy's time in Europe had a lasting impact on him. It was here, amidst the tumultuous atmosphere of the French Revolution, that he began to realize the importance of diplomacy and the delicate balance required to maintain peace between nations. Though he was still a young boy, he began to see the political world in a new light, one that would shape his career and his views on governance for the rest of his life. By the time the Adams family left France in 1783, John Quincy was not just a child of the American Revolution. He was becoming a young man with a deep understanding of international affairs. This formative period in Europe was crucial in preparing him for the role he would play in shaping American diplomacy. However, it was not only his exposure to European politics that marked these years, it was also his growing sense of duty to his country and his family. He understood the importance of sacrifice, honour and commitment, values that would define his later work. Throughout his childhood, John Quincy Adams was immersed in a world of ideas, of intellectual debate and discussion. His family was firmly rooted in the intellectual traditions of the American Revolution, and John Quincy, though young, was expected to take part in these discussions. His education was broad, encompassing not only the traditional subjects of Greek and Latin, but also the philosophies and ideas that were guiding the revolution. In many ways, his life was already being shaped by the forces of history, even as he was still a child. John Quincy's early life was not one of ease or comfort. It was marked by the strains of revolution, the pressures of public duty, and the intellectual demands placed upon him by his parents. Yet, it was these very experiences that forged the man who would one day become one of America's most influential statesmen. His childhood in the shadow of revolution was not just a time of personal growth, it was a time that shaped his understanding of the world and his place in it. As the revolution continued to unfold, so too did John Quincy's sense of responsibility toward his country. It was during these early years, in the shadow of a nation's struggle for independence, that he began to understand the weight of public service, a lesson that would guide him throughout his life. His childhood was marked by a quiet but profound sense of duty. Duty to his country, to his family, and to the ideals of liberty and justice that would shape his future. After the Adams family returned from Europe in 1785, John Quincy Adams was at a crossroads. He was no longer the child caught up in the whirlwind of revolutionary change. He was now a young man, eager to find his place in the world. His father had just become the second president of the United States, and the country was still finding its footing after the Revolution. John Quincy, now 18 years old, had to decide how he would serve the new republic. His education became the next important step in his life. Having been immersed in European courts and the ideas of diplomacy during his early years, John Quincy was eager to continue his studies. His father's influence, coupled with his own keen intellect, led him to Harvard College, where he enrolled in 1787. The college was a place of rigorous intellectual engagement, and it was here that John Quincy began to shape his own understanding of philosophy, law, and politics. At Harvard, John Quincy Adams proved to be a serious and diligent student, and his professors took note of his abilities. He was well read in classical literature and the works of Enlightenment thinkers. His intellectual foundation was further enriched by his exposure to the great debates and ideas that were defining the early United States. Even at this young age, John Quincy was already formulating his thoughts on the nature of governance and diplomacy, drawing upon his early experiences in Europe and the American Revolution. However, Harvard was not always an easy place for John Quincy Adams. The strict conservative environment of the institution did not always align with his independent thinking. He found himself at odds with some of the prevailing views at the time, yet he remained respectful and open to learning. His time at Harvard reinforced the values of hard work, perseverance, and intellectual rigor, traits that would serve him well in the future. During his years at Harvard, John Quincy's intellectual curiosity blossomed, but his path was also influenced by the ongoing political developments in the young United States. The nation was still in its infancy, and it was uncertain what shape its political system would take. As John Quincy considered his future, he became more aware of the demands and challenges of public service. The intellectual environment of Harvard, combined with his father's growing prominence, created a unique atmosphere for John Quincy. It was clear that his destiny lay in the service of his country, but how he would serve it was still unfolding. As his time at Harvard drew to a close in 1789, John Quincy Adams was presented with a new opportunity that would influence the course of his life. His father, now the President of the United States, needed his son's help. John Quincy had been groomed for a life of public service, but this was a new and immediate challenge. Rather than continuing his studies, he decided to step into the world of diplomacy and statesmanship. In the summer of 1789, John Quincy Adams joined his father in Europe once again, this time on a diplomatic mission to the Netherlands. This decision marked the beginning of his lifelong career in public service, but it also provided him with invaluable experience in diplomacy, giving him a deeper understanding of the world's complexities and the delicate art of statecraft. The years that followed were formative for John Quincy. He travelled to various European capitals, meeting with important figures and negotiating on behalf of the fledgling United States. He learned firsthand the challenges of representing a nation that was still viewed with skepticism by European powers. These diplomatic experiences were not merely about learning the technicalities of foreign relations. They were about understanding the values of his own country and how to defend and promote them on the world stage. John Quincy's time in Europe further solidified his belief in the importance of diplomacy and peaceful engagement. Yet, it was not just the political atmosphere of Europe that shaped him during these years. It was also his personal development. At the age of 22, John Quincy Adams was emerging from the shadow of his parents into his own role as a public servant. The world was changing, and so was he. During this period, John Quincy Adams wrote a number of letters that showcased his growing understanding of the world. These letters, many addressed to his father, reveal a thoughtful young man grappling with the ideas of freedom, independence, and national sovereignty. They are a testament to his intellectual depth and his ability to think critically about the issues facing his country. His diplomatic career soon took him to Prussia, where he worked as the US minister to the court of Frederick William II. This was a significant step in his development as a diplomat and a statesman. His work in Prussia allowed him to gain first-hand knowledge of European politics, which would prove invaluable as he navigated the complexities of international relations throughout his career. The years from 1785 to 1789 were a period of personal and professional growth for John Quincy Adams. His education at Harvard, combined with his diplomatic experiences in Europe, laid the foundation for his future role in the United States government. By the time he returned to America, he was ready to step into the world of politics, armed with the knowledge and experiences that would guide him throughout his life. John Quincy Adams' journey from the classrooms of Harvard to the diplomatic halls of Europe was not just about education in the traditional sense. It was about becoming a man who would spend his life in service to his country. His early experiences, both in America and abroad, shaped him into a figure who would later play a pivotal role in shaping the direction of the United States. His childhood in the shadow of revolution had given him a strong sense of duty, and his time at Harvard and in Europe had given him the tools to act on that duty. As the young John Quincy Adams continued his travels and began to understand the intricacies of diplomacy, it became increasingly clear that his path was one of service, one that would require sacrifice, intellect, and a deep commitment to the ideals of freedom and justice. The experiences of these formative years would prepare him for the challenges ahead, and would lay the groundwork for a career in which he would become one of America's most influential figures. In 1797, John Quincy Adams embarked on a crucial phase of his diplomatic career, which would solidify his reputation as a skilled and principled statesman. At the age of 29, he was appointed by President John Adams as the US Minister to Prussia. It was a momentous opportunity for the young diplomat who had already gained a wealth of experience during his time in Europe. Prussia, a significant European power at the time, would provide John Quincy with a unique setting to hone his diplomatic abilities further, navigating the complexities of European politics at a critical time in history. The late 18th century was a period of intense geopolitical maneuvering in Europe. In the wake of the American Revolution and the French Revolution, the United States found itself striving to maintain its independence and sovereignty, while also engaging with the powerful monarchies of Europe. John Quincy Adams, deeply committed to the ideals of American independence and republicanism, took on the task of representing his country with a quiet but unwavering determination. In Prussia, he faced the challenge of ensuring that the US maintained its neutrality while avoiding entanglement in European conflicts. During his time in Prussia, Adams grew accustomed to the intricacies of European diplomacy. He navigated delicate negotiations, often walking a fine line between defending American interests and recognizing the complex realities of European politics. His diplomatic approach was one of reasoned discussion and careful strategy, and he became well regarded by his colleagues for his intellect, tact, and clear commitment to the principles of the United States. In addition to his work in Prussia, Adams' diplomatic duties also took him to other European capitals, where he met with key political figures and observed the delicate balance of power between nations. These experiences gave him a unique perspective on international relations, one that would prove valuable in the years to come. One of the major challenges faced by John Quincy Adams during this time was the rise of tensions between France and the United States. The French Revolution had ignited fierce debates over the direction of American foreign policy. Should the United States support the French, who had fought alongside the colonies during the Revolutionary War, or should it distance itself from the tumultuous events in France and focus on securing its own future? Adams, like many of his contemporaries, was deeply concerned with the stability of the young American Republic. He feared that getting too involved in European conflicts would distract the United States from its primary goal, maintaining its independence. His position was clear: the US should strive to remain neutral in the conflicts of Europe. His diplomatic work in Prussia reflected this belief, as he sought to prevent the United States from being drawn into the war between France and Britain. Though his diplomatic duties in Prussia were relatively quiet, they laid the foundation for John Quincy Adams' later work as a statesman. His time abroad also afforded him an opportunity to reflect on the nature of international relations, and he became increasingly convinced that the United States must carefully navigate its relationships with European powers. He was determined that the US should never be a pawn in the struggles of Europe, but instead chart its own course, guided by the ideals of liberty and justice. During his time in Prussia, John Quincy Adams also deepened his understanding of European politics, particularly the relationship between monarchies and republicanism. Prussia, under King Frederick William II, was an absolute monarchy, and Adams saw firsthand the stark contrast between the American system of government and that of Europe. This reinforced his belief in the importance of republicanism and the need for the United States to protect its democratic principles. As a diplomat, Adams also took on the role of an advocate for American interests in Europe. He worked tirelessly to promote trade and economic relations between the United States and Prussia, striving to open new avenues for commerce and strengthen the economic ties between the two nations. This was no easy task, as Prussia, like many European powers, was protective of its own interests and wary of foreign influence. Yet Adams, with his diplomatic skill and unwavering resolve, was able to secure favourable terms for the United States. By the time John Quincy Adams returned to the United States in 1801, he had accumulated a wealth of diplomatic experience and a deep understanding of European politics. His work in Prussia had proven invaluable in shaping his approach to international relations. He had witnessed the challenges of maintaining neutrality, the intricacies of negotiation, and the delicate balance of power between nations. All of these lessons would inform his future work, both as a diplomat and as a public servant. Although his time in Prussia was relatively short, It marked a turning point in Adams' career. It was here that he developed the confidence and the intellectual depth that would define his later work in both diplomacy and public office. The years he spent in Europe provided him with the tools to navigate the complexities of international relations, and they gave him a first-hand understanding of the challenges facing the United States as it sought to establish itself on the world stage. Returning to America in 1801, John Quincy Adams was not the same young man who had left years earlier. He had grown into a seasoned diplomat, with a profound understanding of the world beyond the shores of his home country. His experiences in Europe had shaped his worldview, and he was now ready to contribute to the young republic in new and important ways. After returning from his diplomatic missions in Europe, John Quincy Adams found himself at the centre of American politics in a way he had never been before. In 1817, President James Monroe appointed him as Secretary of State, a position that would become one of the most influential in shaping the future of the United States. At the time, the nation was emerging from the turmoil of the War of 1812, and Monroe's administration marked a period of relative peace and national unity, often referred to as the era of good feelings. It was within this climate that Adams would serve as the architect of American foreign policy for nearly 8 years. As Secretary of State, Adams worked tirelessly to protect American interests on the global stage while upholding the ideals of independence and sovereignty that were so dear to him. He saw himself as a defender of the nation's future, and his efforts were directed toward ensuring that the United States would remain neutral in the face of European conflicts and protect its territorial integrity in the Western Hemisphere. One of Adams' most significant accomplishments during this period was his involvement in the drafting of the Monroe Doctrine in 1823. This bold statement of American policy declared that the Western Hemisphere was closed to further European colonization, and that any interference by European powers in the Americas would be viewed as a direct threat to the United States. The Monroe Doctrine became a cornerstone of U.S. foreign policy, establishing the nation's role as a protector of the Western Hemisphere and a defender of its republican ideals. The Monroe Doctrine, though not immediately recognized as the defining principle it would later become, was a reflection of Adams' belief in the importance of maintaining American independence from European powers. He understood that the United States as a young nation needed to assert its authority and protect its interests in a world where colonial powers still dominated vast regions of the globe. Adams' vision was clear. The US would stand as a beacon of democracy in the Western Hemisphere, and it would not allow foreign powers to undermine the sovereignty of the Americas. In addition to the Monroe Doctrine, Adams played a key role in other important diplomatic initiatives during his tenure as Secretary of State. One such achievement was the Treaty of 1818 with Britain, which resolved lingering territorial disputes between the United States and Canada. The treaty established the 49th parallel as the boundary between the US and British Canada, and it also allowed for joint occupation of the Oregon Territory, paving the way for peaceful cooperation between the two nations in the years to come. Another major accomplishment during this period was the Adams-Onis Treaty of 1819, in which the United States acquired Florida from Spain. This was a crucial moment in American history, as it not only expanded the nation's territory, but also solidified its control over much of the southeastern United States. The treaty also addressed Spain's concerns about American encroachment on its holdings in the West, and it marked a significant achievement for Adams in his pursuit of securing the nation's borders and maintaining peace with European powers. Throughout his tenure as Secretary of State, Adams was known for his meticulous attention to detail and his unwavering commitment to diplomacy. He believed that the United States should never resort to war unless absolutely necessary, and he sought to avoid entanglements in European conflicts. His diplomatic skills were widely admired, and his efforts to maintain peace while advancing American interest earned him the respect of his peers. Yet, despite his successes, Adams' time as Secretary of State was not without its challenges. The political climate in the United States was becoming increasingly polarized, and tensions between political factions were growing. Adams, a Federalist turned Republican, found himself caught between the interests of the old guard and the emerging new generation of leaders. His pragmatic approach to foreign policy, while widely respected, did not always align with the desires of those who sought a more assertive or isolationist stance for the United States. Adams also faced challenges within his own administration. Though he and President Monroe shared a similar vision for the nation, they did not always see eye to eye on every issue. Adams was often frustrated by what he perceived as Monroe's reluctance to fully embrace his more forward-thinking policies. Yet despite these tensions, Adams remained dedicated to the work of securing the nation's future and promoting its values abroad. As Adams worked on foreign policy, he also kept a careful eye on domestic matters, understanding that the strength of the United States depended on both its standing in the world and its internal unity. He was deeply concerned with the expansion of slavery into new territories and the potential for conflict over the issue, and he made efforts to address the growing sectional divisions within the country. His belief in the principles of liberty and justice extended to all people, and he hoped to prevent the divisiveness that slavery could bring to the nation. Throughout his years as Secretary of State, John Quincy Adams worked tirelessly, often behind the scenes, to shape the future of the United States. His diplomatic achievements were significant, but his work also laid the groundwork for his eventual rise to the presidency. In the quiet corridors of diplomacy, Adams' influence on the nation's foreign policy and its future direction was profound, and his legacy as one of America's greatest diplomats began to take shape. As Adams' time in Monroe's cabinet came to an end, he found himself on the cusp of another transition. The political landscape of the United States was shifting, and the nation was preparing for a new era of leadership. Adams was not just a key figure in the foreign policy of his time, he was on the brink of becoming one of the most important political figures in the history of the United States. In 1824, after serving as Secretary of State under President Monroe, John Quincy Adams found himself at the center of a bitterly contested presidential election. The political landscape in the United States was shifting, and the nation was on the verge of a new era of leadership. Adams, who'd long been a respected diplomat and statesman, now faced the challenge of transitioning from the world of foreign policy to the complexities of domestic politics. The election of 1824 was unique in that it was the first time in American history that no candidate won a clear majority of electoral votes. 4 candidates, John Quincy Adams, Andrew Jackson, Henry Clay, and William Crawford, competed for the presidency, and the race was marked by intense campaigning and personal rivalries. Jackson, who had garnered the most popular votes, did not have enough electoral votes to secure victory. In accordance with the Constitution, the decision was left to the House of Representatives, which ultimately chose Adams as the 6th President of the United States. The election was a contentious one, and many of Jackson's supporters believed that the outcome was the result of a corrupt bargain between Adams and Henry Clay. Jackson, who had been popular among the common people, felt that he had been unfairly denied the presidency. The allegations of a corrupt bargain would follow Adams throughout his presidency and create a cloud of political tension that would overshadow his time in office. Despite the controversy surrounding his election, Adams entered the White House with a clear vision for the future of the United States. He believed in the power of federal government to support national development and improve the lives of ordinary Americans. His vision was one of progress, and he advocated for internal improvements such as building infrastructure, promoting education, and expanding scientific research. He sought to advance the nation in ways that would benefit future generations, believing that the federal government had a duty to promote the general welfare. However, Adams' presidency was fraught with political opposition. Many of Jackson's supporters, who had been disappointed by the outcome of the election, became vocal critics of Adams. The political climate of the time was deeply divided, and the presidency became a battleground between competing factions. Adams, a man of conviction, stood firm in his beliefs, but his idealistic vision for the country often clashed with the realities of partisan politics. One of Adams' most significant challenges during his presidency was his inability to garner the support of Congress. Despite his ambitious proposals for internal improvements, including the construction of roads, canals, and other infrastructure projects, he faced strong opposition from those who believed in a more limited role for the federal government. His efforts to promote national development were thwarted by political gridlock, and his presidency became increasingly isolated from the legislative branch. Adams' attempts to create a more active federal government were not the only points of contention during his presidency. He also faced challenges in the realm of foreign policy. Though his earlier work as Secretary of State had earned him a reputation as a skilled diplomat, his approach to foreign relations was not always in line with the desires of the American public. His advocacy for international cooperation and peace, while grounded in idealism, was seen by many as overly cautious and lacking the assertiveness that some believed the United States needed on the world stage. Despite these challenges, Adams was not without his accomplishments. His administration is often credited with laying the groundwork for the future expansion of the United States. His support for scientific and technological advancements, particularly in the fields of agriculture, astronomy, and infrastructure, had lasting effects on the nation. His vision of a united and prosperous America, though difficult to achieve in his time, would resonate in the years that followed. One of the notable achievements of Adams's presidency was his support for the establishment of the National Institute of Science, which later became the Smithsonian Institution. He believed that the nation's growth depended not only on political and economic strength, but also on intellectual and scientific progress. His encouragement of research and innovation was part of his broader vision for an enlightened republic, where education and knowledge would shape the future of the nation. Adams' presidency was also marked by his attempts to address the growing issue of slavery. While he was outspoken in his opposition to the expansion of slavery into new territories, his efforts were met with resistance, and the issue remained a deeply divisive one in American politics. Adams' strong moral convictions on the issue of slavery, combined with his belief in the power of government to enact change, made him a vocal advocate for emancipation and civil rights in the years following his presidency. Yet, despite his idealism and his desire for progress, Adams was not able to achieve the political success he'd hoped for during his presidency. His vision of a united and prosperous nation, guided by the principles of liberty and justice, clashed with the realities of a deeply divided country. As a result, his presidency is often seen as a failure, overshadowed by the success of his political rival, Andrew Jackson, who would go on to become the nation's 7th president. John Quincy Adams left the presidency in 1829 with a sense of frustration, but also with a deep commitment to the values he had espoused throughout his life. Though his presidency did not result in the sweeping changes he had hoped for, his time in office was a testament to his dedication to the nation and its future. His unwavering belief in the power of government to promote the general welfare, even in the face of political opposition, left a lasting mark on the country. As Adams left the White House, he found a new sense of purpose in his return to public life. Though his presidency had come to an end, his journey was far from over. The next phase of his life would see him return to Congress, where he would continue to advocate for the causes he believed in, including the abolition of slavery and the promotion of civil rights for all Americans. His commitment to public service, despite the setbacks of his presidency, was unwavering, and it would define the remainder of his career. John Quincy Adams's presidency, which began with such promise, was marred by political conflict and mounting opposition. The election of 1828 had brought Andrew Jackson to power, defeating Adams in a bitter contest. Jackson's victory marked the end of Adams' presidency and the beginning of a new era in American politics, one that would see the rise of populism and the decline of the more aristocratic, intellectual approach to governance that Adams had championed. When Adams left the White House in March 1829, it was with a sense of frustration. Though he had worked tirelessly to promote his vision for the future of the United States, his efforts had been thwarted at nearly every turn by partisan opposition in Congress. His ambitious plans for internal improvements, including the construction of roads, canals, and educational initiatives, were stymied by those who opposed an active federal government. His idealistic approach to governance, rooted in the belief that the federal government should promote the general welfare of its citizens, had failed to gain the political support needed to implement his agenda. Adams was acutely aware that his presidency had not been the success he had hoped for. He had entered the White House with a deep conviction that the United States should pursue a course of progress and development. Yet, despite his best efforts, his presidency had become bogged down in political gridlock, and many of his proposals had been rejected or ignored by Congress. The bitter personal and political battles that had defined his time in office left him with a sense of defeat. But despite the disappointment of his presidency, John Quincy Adams was not one to retreat into private life. Instead, he returned to public service in a different capacity. His love of his country and his dedication to its principles remained as strong as ever, and he was determined to continue serving in whatever way he could. Adams' next chapter would take him back to Congress, where he would begin a new phase of his career as a statesman and advocate for the causes he believed in. Adams' return to Congress in 1831 was a significant moment in his life. He'd spent years at the forefront of American diplomacy and had been President of the United States, but now he was returning to the legislative branch, where his influence would be felt in a different way. As a congressman, Adams would continue his fight for the principles of liberty and justice that had defined his public career. But now he would do so from the floor of the House of Representatives. Though his return to Congress was not without its challenges, Adams quickly established himself as a powerful voice in the legislative chamber. His reputation as a principled leader and a defender of the Constitution gave him credibility among his fellow lawmakers, and he used his platform to speak out on a variety of important issues, most notably the issue of slavery. One of the most defining aspects of Adams' post-presidential career was his unwavering commitment to the abolition of slavery. Throughout his time in Congress, he became one of the most vocal opponents of the institution, consistently introducing petitions and speaking out against the expansion of slavery into new territories. His efforts were met with resistance from many of his colleagues, particularly those from the South, who defended slavery as an essential part of their economy and way of life. But Adams, despite the hostility he faced, remained steadfast in his opposition to slavery, believing that the United States must fulfill its promise of liberty and equality for all people. Adams' passionate advocacy for abolition earned him both admiration and disdain. While many saw him as a champion of human rights, others viewed him as an agitator who was stirring up trouble. His actions were particularly controversial in the South, where slavery was entrenched and any criticism of the institution was seen as a direct threat to their way of life. Despite the personal attacks and the political obstacles, Adams refused to back down from his commitment to ending slavery, and his voice became one of the most important in the abolitionist movement. Another challenge Adams faced in Congress was the increasing sectionalism that was dividing the country. The debate over slavery was intensifying, and the question of whether new states should permit slavery was creating a rift between the North and South. Adams, deeply concerned about the growing divisions, worked tirelessly to promote unity and prevent the country from falling into civil war. He believed that the Union was essential to the survival of the United States, and he used his position in Congress to argue for compromise and understanding between the conflicting factions. Though Adams did not achieve all of his political goals during his post-presidential years, his time in Congress was marked by a sense of purpose and determination. He saw himself not as a man of personal ambition, but as a servant of the American people, willing to sacrifice his own political career for the greater good of the nation. In many ways, his work in Congress was a continuation of the ideals he had espoused throughout his life. The belief that government should serve the people, protect their rights, and promote the values of liberty and justice. Despite the setbacks and disappointments of his presidency, John Quincy Adams' legacy as a public servant was far from over. He had failed to achieve all of his ambitious goals during his time in office, but his determination and commitment to his country would continue to influence American politics for years to come. Adams' return to Congress was a testament to his enduring belief in the power of government to shape the future of the nation, and his advocacy for the abolition of slavery would leave a lasting impact on the struggle for civil rights in America. After his presidency ended in 1829, John Quincy Adams could have easily retired to a quieter life. Yet, true to his lifelong commitment to public service, he chose a different path, returning to the U.S. House of Representatives in 1831. His decision to resume his political career was not driven by personal ambition, but by his deep conviction that his country needed his voice in the turbulent times ahead. Adams's return to Congress was not without its challenges. He had already served in various diplomatic roles and as president, but now, as a congressman, he found himself once again at the heart of America's political struggles. The nation was becoming more divided, with the issue of slavery becoming ever more contentious. Adams, a staunch opponent of slavery, used his position to advocate for abolition, fighting for the rights of enslaved people at a time when the institution was becoming deeply entrenched in the South. Despite being a former president, Adams was not immune to the partisan politics that dominated the House of Representatives. He had to work across party lines, often finding himself in opposition to those who sought to preserve the status quo, particularly when it came to slavery. Many of his fellow lawmakers viewed his positions as radical, but Adams believed that the nation's future depended on confronting the moral and political issue of slavery head-on. Adams' time in the House was marked by his tireless efforts to introduce petitions against slavery and to speak out against its expansion into new territories. His advocacy for abolition was met with fierce resistance, particularly from Southern lawmakers who were determined to protect their way of life. In the face of this opposition, Adams stood firm, refusing to back down in his fight for justice and human rights. His efforts in Congress were not only a reflection of his deep moral convictions, but also his unwavering belief that the federal government had a duty to protect the rights of all people, regardless of race or status. One of the most notable episodes of his time in Congress was his defiance of the gag rule, a policy instituted by Southern lawmakers to prevent discussion of slavery on the floor of the House. In 1836, the House passed the gag rule, which effectively silenced petitions and debates on slavery. Adams, however, refused to accept this silencing of free speech, and began presenting anti-slavery petitions from his constituents. His actions led to heated debates, and he became a target of personal attacks from those who wanted to stifle the conversation about slavery. Despite the opposition, Adams continued to speak out, believing that silence on the issue would only prolong the nation's moral and political crisis. Adams' fight against the gag rule and his relentless advocacy for the abolition of slavery made him a hero to abolitionists and a villain to those who defended slavery. His voice, both in Congress and in his public speeches, helped galvanize the abolitionist movement, and his actions helped lay the groundwork for the eventual end of slavery in the United States. But Adams was not only focused on the issue of slavery. His time in Congress also saw his advocacy for other important issues, including civil rights, education, and scientific progress. He believed that government should not only protect the people's rights, but also promote the common good. He worked to expand access to education, believing that an educated citizenry was essential for the nation's continued success. He also supported scientific and technological advancements, seeing them as critical to the nation's growth and prosperity. Adams was also deeply concerned about the growing sectionalism within the country. The divisions between North and South, particularly over slavery, were becoming more pronounced, and Adams feared that these divisions could tear the nation apart. He used his position in Congress to call for unity and compromise, hoping that the country could find a way to heal its divisions before it was too late. Though his efforts to prevent the Civil War would ultimately fail, his warnings about the dangers of disunion proved prescient in the years that followed. Through all of his work in Congress, Adams never lost sight of his core beliefs. He remained deeply committed to the principles of liberty, justice, and equality that had guided his entire career. He saw his work in the House of Representatives as part of a larger mission to ensure that the United States lived up to its founding ideals. He was not driven by political gain, but by a sense of duty to his country and its people. Adams's time in Congress was marked by both triumphs and setbacks. His advocacy for the abolition of slavery, while not immediately successful, helped lay the groundwork for the larger abolitionist movement. His unwavering dedication to his principles earned him the respect of many, but also made him a target of those who sought to maintain the status quo. Despite the personal and political challenges, Adams remained resolute in his mission, believing that his efforts would ultimately help bring about the change the nation needed. In 1848, at the age of 80, Adams' long career in public service came to an end. He suffered a stroke while sitting at his desk in the House of Representatives, and though he survived for 2 more days, he passed away on February 23, 1848. His death marked the end of an era in American politics, but his legacy lived on. Adams' lifelong commitment to liberty, justice, and the common good helped shape the nation, and his work in Congress, particularly his fight against slavery, remains a vital part of his enduring legacy. As John Quincy Adams returned to public service in the House of Representatives in 1831, he found himself in the midst of a national debate that would define the remaining years of his political life, the issue of slavery. The United States was becoming more divided, particularly between the North, where abolitionist sentiment was growing, and the South, where slavery was not only entrenched but increasingly vital to the economy. Adams, always a firm believer in the principles of liberty and equality, became one of the most vocal and tireless advocates for the abolition of slavery in the United States. Throughout the 1830s and 1840s, Adams faced increasing pressure from those who sought to maintain the institution of slavery. These forces were not just political, but deeply rooted in the fabric of American society, especially in the southern states. But Adams, undeterred by threats and personal attacks, stood resolutely against slavery, believing that the United States must fulfill its promise of liberty for all its citizens. His opposition was not just a moral stance. It was a call for the nation to live up to its founding ideals. One of the key moments in Adams's anti-slavery advocacy came in 1836 when the House of Representatives passed the gag rule, which prohibited the discussion of anti-slavery petitions on the floor of the House. This rule, designed to silence the growing abolitionist movement, was direct challenge to the right of free speech and the right of citizens to petition their government for redress of grievances. The gag rule was seen by many as a victory for pro-slavery forces, and it effectively shut down any attempt to discuss slavery in the halls of Congress. But John Quincy Adams refused to be silenced. He became one of the most vocal opponents of the gag rule, introducing petitions and speeches that directly challenged the rule's legitimacy. He believed that the gag rule was a direct violation of the Constitution, and he made it his mission to see it repealed. Adams continued to present petitions from his constituents that called for the abolition of slavery, despite the opposition and the risks to his political career. Adams' actions in defying the gag rule drew both admiration and scorn. His courage in standing up against the gag rule made him a hero to abolitionists, but it also earned him the enmity of those who sought to preserve slavery. He was accused of stirring up discord and dividing the nation. Yet Adams remained steadfast in his belief that slavery was an immoral institution that must be abolished, even if it meant facing personal attacks and political isolation. In 1839, Adams was called upon to represent the African captives who had been involved in the Amistad case. In 1839, a group of Africans had been illegally captured and sold into slavery, but they managed to overthrow their captors and take control of the ship, after being captured by the US Navy. The question arose of whether these individuals should be treated as property or as free human beings. Adams argued passionately before the Supreme Court that the Africans aboard the Amistad were free people who'd been illegally enslaved. His legal argument helped secure their freedom, and the case became a landmark moment in the fight against slavery. Beyond his efforts in Congress, Adams also worked tirelessly to encourage the growth of the abolitionist movement outside of Washington. He wrote extensively on the subject, giving speeches, writing articles, and engaging in dialogue with activists who were also dedicated to the cause. Adams believed that the abolition of slavery was not just a political issue, but a moral one that would shape the very identity of the United States. His opposition to slavery was not limited to the question of its legality. It was also a moral and philosophical stance. Adams argued that slavery was a stain on the nation's conscience, incompatible with the ideals of liberty and equality enshrined in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. He believed that the nation's commitment to the idea of freedom was only valid if it applied to all people, regardless of race or status. Adams' fight against slavery was intertwined with his broader advocacy for civil rights. He recognized that the abolition of slavery was only part of the equation, and that the broader issue of equality needed to be addressed as well. In the years leading up to the Civil War, Adams worked to promote civil rights for all Americans, advocating for the protection of the rights of Native Americans, African Americans, and other marginalized groups. He saw the struggle for abolition as part of a larger fight for justice and equality. However, despite his tireless efforts, Adams was often frustrated by the pace of change. The resistance to the abolition of slavery was deeply entrenched, and many of his fellow lawmakers were unwilling to confront the issue directly. Yet Adams remained committed to the cause, convinced that the moral arc of the universe would eventually bend toward justice, even if it took time. By the time of his death in 1848, Adams had become a symbol of the abolitionist movement. His dedication to the cause, his eloquence in defending human rights, and his refusal to back down in the face of political opposition cemented his legacy as one of the most important figures in the fight for abolition. Though he did not live to see the end of slavery in the United States, his efforts laid the groundwork for the eventual success of the abolitionist movement. By the late 1840s, John Quincy Adams had spent decades in public service, shaping the course of American history as a diplomat, president, congressman, and abolitionist. His years of hard work had earned him respect across the nation, but they had also come with personal sacrifices and frustrations. Despite the divisive nature of his presidency and the ongoing battles over slavery, Adams' resolve had never wavered. He continued his service, believing firmly in the importance of justice, equality, and liberty. As the political landscape of the United States continued to evolve, Adams remained committed to his values, even in the face of mounting adversity. By the time Adams reached the age of 80, his health was beginning to decline. However, his mind remained sharp and his commitment to his country remained undiminished. Even as his physical strength waned, he continued to serve in Congress, where he had returned after his presidency, using his voice to advocate for the abolition of slavery and to call for national unity in the face of rising sectional tensions. His final years were marked by his tireless efforts to continue the fight for freedom, even as the country seemed to be moving toward the brink of civil war. Adams had long been a champion of the Union, and as the years passed, he grew increasingly concerned about the growing divide between the North and South. The question of slavery was becoming ever more contentious, and Adams feared that the United States was on the verge of a great conflict. Despite his best efforts to encourage unity, the political divisions in the country seemed to be growing deeper, and Adams found himself struggling to prevent the country from falling into disarray. Yet, even in these difficult times, he remained optimistic about the potential for the nation to overcome its divisions. In early 1848, John Quincy Adams suffered a stroke while sitting at his desk in the House of Representatives. This stroke, though debilitating, did not immediately take his life. He was carried from the chamber and taken to his home, where he lingered for 2 days before passing away on February 23, 1848. His death marked the end of an era in American politics and a moment of reflection for the nation. Adams had dedicated his life to the service of his country, and though his health had failed him, his legacy would live on. The nation mourned the loss of one of its most distinguished figures. Adams' contributions to American diplomacy, his efforts to promote national unity, and his unwavering commitment to justice and equality were recognized and celebrated. His death was not just the loss of a man, but the end of an era, one that had been defined by the ideals of the American Revolution and the struggle for freedom and human rights. In the years following his death, John Quincy Adams' legacy continued to resonate across the United States. His work as a diplomat, his advocacy for the abolition of slavery, and his dedication to the cause of liberty and justice laid the groundwork for the future of the nation. His vision of a United States that upheld the values of freedom and equality for all people would not be realized in his lifetime, but it would eventually become a guiding force in the nation's future. Though Adams did not live to see the end of slavery, his efforts were crucial in raising awareness of the moral and political issues surrounding the institution. His leadership in the fight for abolition helped inspire a generation of activists who would carry on the struggle long after his death. His commitment to the principles of liberty and equality helped shape the moral conscience of the United States, and his work would eventually lead to the abolition of slavery through the 13th Amendment in 1865. As one of the Founding Fathers' most dedicated public servants, John Quincy Adams left an indelible mark on American history. His deep moral convictions, intellectual rigor, and sense of duty to his country continue to inspire those who seek justice and equality in their own time. His legacy is a reminder of the power of unwavering dedication to principles, even in the face of overwhelming opposition. In his final years, Adams was not only a witness to the growing political tensions of the United States, but also a figure who helped to shape the direction of the nation. His advocacy for freedom, his unyielding belief in the promise of liberty, and his commitment to civil rights ensured that his life's work would not be forgotten. The death of John Quincy Adams in 1848 sent shockwaves through the United States, marking the end of one of the nation's most distinguished careers. He had served his country with unwavering dedication for over 5 decades, and his legacy as a diplomat, president, congressman, and abolitionist was cemented in the hearts of many Americans. His passing marked the close of an era that had begun with the revolutionary ideals of the 18th century and would soon give way to the tensions and divisions that would eventually lead to the Civil War. In the days following his death, the nation mourned the loss of a man who had dedicated his life to public service. Despite the controversial nature of his presidency and the challenges he had faced throughout his career, Adams was universally respected for his integrity, his commitment to the principles of liberty, and his tireless efforts to promote justice and equality. His death was not merely the passing of an individual. It was the loss of a key figure in the ongoing struggle to fulfill the promises of the American Revolution. Adams's funeral was a somber occasion, attended by colleagues, friends, and admirers from all walks of life. His casket was draped with the American flag, a symbol of the nation he had served so faithfully. Though his physical presence was gone, the memory of his contributions to the United States remained vivid, and the outpouring of respect and admiration was a testament to his enduring influence on the nation. In the House of Representatives, where Adams had spent so many years of his life, members stood in silent tribute to the man whose voice had echoed through the halls of Congress. His former colleagues, many of whom had disagreed with him on key issues, paid their respects to his dedication to public service. They recognized that, regardless of political differences, Adams had been a man who had always placed the welfare of the nation above personal gain, and who had fought relentlessly for the ideals of liberty, equality, and justice. For the abolitionist movement, Adams' death marked the loss of one of its most vocal and steadfast advocates. Though he did not live to see the end of slavery in the United States, his tireless efforts to raise awareness of the moral and political issues surrounding slavery had paved the way for future victories. Adams's advocacy for the abolition of slavery, his defiance of the gag rule, and his role in cases like the Amistad trial had made him a hero to those who fought for the rights of enslaved people. His legacy would continue to inspire abolitionists in the years that followed, and his contributions to the fight for freedom would not be forgotten. The nation's mourning for John Quincy Adams was not just the mourning of a political figure, but of a man who had dedicated his life to the service of his country. His passing was a moment of reflection for Americans, an opportunity to consider the sacrifices he had made and the values he had championed. It was a time to reflect on the ongoing struggles of the nation, especially the deep divisions that had emerged over slavery, and to remember the ideals of liberty and justice that Adams had fought for throughout his life. Adams' death also came at a time of great change in the United States. The nation was on the verge of the Civil War, and the political and social tensions that had defined Adams' later years were only intensifying. The growing divisions between North and South, particularly over the issue of slavery, would soon culminate in a violent conflict that would reshape the country. Yet despite the challenges that lay ahead, John Quincy Adams' legacy continued to serve as a moral compass for those who sought to preserve the Union and advance the cause of freedom. In the years following his death, Adams' influence on American political thought and practice continued to be felt. His vision of a United States that upheld the ideals of liberty and equality for all people, regardless of race, would be carried forward by future leaders and activists. The abolition of slavery, which would not come to fruition until the passage of the 13th Amendment in 1865, was one of the key goals for which Adams had fought so tirelessly. Though Adams was no longer physically present, his contributions to American society remained a powerful force. His work laid the groundwork for future generations of reformers, and his commitment to justice and equality was a source of inspiration for those who continued to fight for civil rights. His life served as a reminder that, even in the face of immense opposition, one person's voice could make a lasting impact on the course of history. Adams's legacy was also felt abroad. As a diplomat, he had helped to shape American foreign policy and had established the United States as a respected and independent nation on the world stage. His diplomatic efforts, particularly in Europe, were a testament to his belief in the importance of peaceful relations between nations. His advocacy for American interests and his efforts to protect the country from foreign influence had earned him respect among his international peers, and his legacy as a statesman was widely recognized. As the years passed, John Quincy Adams' name became synonymous with the ideals of the American Revolution, the belief that all people are entitled to liberty and equality, and that government should exist to serve the common good. His life and legacy continue to inspire those who work to build a more just and equitable society, and his example serves as a reminder that the fight for freedom and justice is a lifelong commitment. The life and career of John Quincy Adams were marked by his relentless pursuit of justice, liberty, and equality. Although he passed away in 1848, his influence continued to shape American politics and society for many years after his death. As the years passed, the nation began to reflect more deeply on the legacy of the man who'd been a key figure in the nation's formative years. Adams' contributions were not always fully appreciated during his lifetime, especially as political opponents often overshadowed his idealistic vision. Yet, as time went on, the impact of his work became more apparent. One of the key aspects of John Quincy Adams's legacy was his unwavering commitment to the ideals of the American Revolution: liberty, justice, and the pursuit of happiness. Adams believed that these principles were not just theoretical ideals, but values that must be upheld through action and policy. His career, from his work as a diplomat to his time as president and congressman, was guided by these values. Though he faced intense opposition during his life, his unwavering belief in these ideals earned him a lasting place in American history. Adams's role in the abolitionist movement became one of the central elements of his posthumous legacy. His tireless opposition to slavery, his defiance of the gag rule, and his defense of human rights were pivotal in advancing the cause of abolition. Though he did not live to see the end of slavery, his efforts laid the foundation for the larger abolitionist movement, which would eventually lead to the passage of the 13th Amendment in 1865. Adams' unwavering dedication to ending slavery, despite the immense challenges he faced, made him one of the most significant figures in the fight for freedom in America. Adams' work on the abolition of slavery was also part of a broad commitment to civil rights. His belief in the rights of all individuals, regardless of race or background, resonated throughout his career. He not only fought for the rights of African Americans, but also for the rights of Native Americans, and he strongly opposed the Indian removal policies of his time. He recognized that the United States could not truly be a land of freedom and equality, while it continued to subjugate entire groups of people. While Adams's legacy in the abolitionist movement is perhaps his most widely recognized achievement, his contributions to American foreign policy should not be overlooked. As a diplomat, Adams played a key role in shaping the direction of American foreign relations. His work, particularly in Europe, helped to establish the United States as an independent and respected nation on the world stage. His advocacy for American interests, as well as his belief in diplomacy and peaceful relations between nations, set the tone for much of the country's foreign policy in the years that followed. The Monroe Doctrine, which Adams helped to craft, became a cornerstone of American foreign policy. This doctrine, which warned European powers against interfering in the Americas, shaped the relationship between the United States and Europe for many years. Adams understood that the future of the United States depended on its ability to maintain its independence and sovereignty. His diplomatic efforts ensured that the US would be able to navigate the complexities of European politics while maintaining its autonomy. At home, Adams' legacy was more complex. His presidency, though unsuccessful in many ways, laid the groundwork for future progress. His support for internal improvements and infrastructure projects, his advocacy for education, and his belief in the power of federal government to promote the common good were all forward-thinking ideas that influenced the development of the United States. Though his vision for a stronger federal government was not fully realized in his time, his ideas would eventually be embraced by future administrations. Perhaps one of the most enduring aspects of Adams's legacy is his dedication to the public good. Throughout his life, he was committed to serving his country, not for personal gain, but because he believed it was his duty to contribute to the common welfare. His personal sacrifices, his intellectual rigor, and his moral convictions helped to shape the trajectory of the United States in ways that are still felt today. In the years following his death, Adams was increasingly recognized as one of the most important figures in American history. His contributions to the nation's development, particularly in terms of diplomacy, abolition, and civil rights, have been celebrated in various ways. Statues, memorials, and institutions have been dedicated to his memory, ensuring that his name and legacy live on for generations to come. Adams's legacy also endures through his writings. His letters, diaries, and speeches offer a window into the mind of one of America's most thoughtful and principled leaders. His words continue to inspire those who strive for justice, equality, and the protection of human rights. In his writings, Adams articulated a vision for the United States that was both idealistic and pragmatic, grounded in the belief that the nation's strength lay in its commitment to liberty and its ability to evolve and grow in the face of challenges. Though Adams did not live to see the ultimate triumph of the causes he fought for, his life's work was not in vain. His advocacy for the abolition of slavery, his belief in the power of education, and his commitment to the ideals of the American Revolution all contributed to the evolution of the United States into a nation that, over time, would move closer to fulfilling its founding ideals. His legacy is a testament to the enduring power of principles and the importance of standing up for what is right, even when the path forward is uncertain. John Quincy Adams' impact on the United States continued well beyond his death. His legacy was not only defined by his direct contributions to the country's political and diplomatic history, but also by the inspiration he provided to future generations of Americans. Throughout his life, Adams was committed to public service, upholding the values of liberty, justice, and equality. These ideals became the foundation for his posthumous influence, shaping the way the country viewed itself and its role in the world for years to come. Adams' dedication to abolition, which was one of the defining features of his career, served as a powerful example for future generations of civil rights activists. His uncompromising stance against slavery, particularly during his time in Congress, set a precedent for those who would later lead the fight for emancipation. Adams' vocal opposition to the institution of slavery, along with his efforts to combat the gag rule and protect the right of free speech, laid the groundwork for the abolition of slavery, even though he did not live to see its end. Adams' efforts were especially significant in the broader context of American political thought. His belief in the moral duty of government to protect the rights of all citizens, regardless of race, resonated deeply during the abolitionist movement. Figures like Frederick Douglass, Harriet Tubman, and William Lloyd Garrison, who fought for the abolition of slavery, looked to Adams as a model of moral courage and political integrity. Adams's refusal to back down in the face of fierce opposition inspired these leaders to continue their work even when the road seemed uncertain and perilous. In addition to his abolitionist efforts, Adams' commitment to education, scientific progress, and the arts influenced the intellectual development of the United States. His support for the establishment of institutions like the Smithsonian Institution reflected his belief that education and knowledge were fundamental to the nation's success. Adams viewed scientific and cultural advancements as essential to the progress of the Republic, and he worked to create an environment where intellectual growth and exploration could flourish. His advocacy for the sciences and intellectual pursuits would later resonate with future leaders who sought to establish the United States as a global leader in education and innovation. The establishment of the Smithsonian was just one example of his belief in the power of knowledge and the importance of preserving and advancing it for the future. Adams understood that a strong nation was not only built on military might or economic power, but also on the intellectual and cultural contributions that shaped its identity. Beyond his contributions to the abolitionist and intellectual movements, John Quincy Adams' influence extended to American foreign policy. As a diplomat, Adams played a crucial role in shaping the direction of U.S. foreign relations, particularly through his involvement in the Monroe Doctrine. His vision for an independent, non-interventionist United States became a cornerstone of American foreign policy for generations. The Monroe Doctrine, which he helped craft, asserted that European powers should not interfere in the affairs of the Western Hemisphere, a stance that would shape the US's relationship with other nations for nearly a century. Adams's diplomacy, grounded in reasoned negotiation and cautious engagement, would also influence the strategies of future American leaders. His firm belief in maintaining American sovereignty while avoiding unnecessary entanglements in foreign conflicts served as a model for US diplomacy throughout the 19th and early 20th centuries. Even during periods of American expansion, the principles of diplomacy and international respect that Adams championed remained a guiding force in American foreign policy. Adams' influence was also evident in the development of American political ideals. His political philosophy was rooted in his firm belief in the principles of republicanism, democracy, and constitutional governance. His deep understanding of the founding documents of the United States, the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, informed his approach to public service. He saw the role of government as one that must protect individual rights and promote the common good, a vision that would continue to inspire future leaders committed to expanding civil rights and promoting social justice. In the years following Adams' death, his influence continued to be felt in the debates over the expansion of slavery and the protection of civil rights. His moral leadership during the contentious debates over slavery provided a moral compass for those who sought to dismantle the institution. The principles of justice and equality that he had championed were integral to the work of those who pushed for the abolition of slavery and the expansion of civil rights in the 19th and 20th centuries. John Quincy Adams' influence was also felt in the continued development of the United States as a global power. His diplomatic efforts, combined with his vision for an independent and strong America, helped to lay the foundation for the nation's later role on the world stage. His belief in the importance of diplomacy and peaceful engagement with other nations resonated with leaders who sought to promote American interests without resorting to war or military intervention. As the United States entered the 20th century and became increasingly involved in global affairs, Adams' diplomatic principles remained relevant. His belief in diplomacy as a means of resolving conflicts his commitment to human rights, and his vision for an America that could lead by example, rather than by force, continued to influence US foreign policy throughout the century. In summary, John Quincy Adams' life was marked by a dedication to public service, moral integrity, and an unwavering belief in the principles of liberty and equality. His influence, both during his lifetime and after his death, helped to shape the direction of the United States, from the abolition of slavery to the development of a strong, independent nation that valued education, justice, and diplomacy. As future generations of Americans looked to the example set by Adams, they found a model of leadership grounded in principle and driven by a deep commitment to the ideals of freedom and equality. John Quincy Adams lived at a pivotal moment in American history when the United States was undergoing a profound transformation. The years between his presidency and his death marked a period of immense social and political change in the country. While his time as president was filled with challenges and frustrations, his later years in Congress and his public advocacy for causes such as abolition, civil rights, and national unity left an indelible mark on the development of American democracy. In the 1820s and 1830s, the United States was expanding rapidly, both geographically and politically. The political system was evolving, with the rise of mass political parties, and the question of who should have the right to vote was becoming a more prominent issue. The expansion of suffrage and the growth of popular participation in politics would have a lasting effect on the nation, and Adams was keenly aware of the importance of these developments. Adams, though not always in tune with the rising political forces of his time, recognized that American democracy was evolving. He believed in a strong and active federal government, but also in the preservation of individual rights and liberties. He saw the expansion of voting rights and greater involvement of the common people in politics as vital components of a thriving democratic republic. Yet, while he supported the idea of an expanded electorate, he also believed that those in positions of power had a moral obligation to guide the country with wisdom and a commitment to justice. The rise of Andrew Jackson and the Jacksonian Democrats marked a significant shift in American politics. Jackson's populist appeal resonated with the common people, particularly in the South and West, while Adams represented a more intellectual, aristocratic vision of governance. Jackson's presidency, which followed Adams, was marked by a greater emphasis on states' rights and a more limited role for the federal government. This marked a shift away from Adams' vision of a strong centralized government that could promote national unity and progress through federal action. Adams' own political philosophy, rooted in a belief in the moral responsibility of government, was somewhat at odds with Jackson's populist states' rights-oriented policies. Adams feared that Jackson's approach could undermine the central authority of the federal government and that it could lead to a fragmentation of the Union. The growing sectionalism between North and South, particularly over the issue of slavery, was a source of great concern to Adams, who saw the nation's unity as essential to its survival. His belief in a strong federal government, however, was not shared by many of his contemporaries, especially as the democratic ideals of the Jacksonian era took root. Despite his political differences with Jackson and the growing influence of populist forces, Adams never wavered in his belief that the United States must remain true to the ideals of the American Revolution. He was committed to ensuring that the country would be a land of freedom and equality, where the rights of all citizens, regardless of race or background, would be protected. Adams continued to fight for those ideals, particularly through his advocacy for the abolition of slavery and the protection of civil rights for marginalized groups. Adams' work in Congress, particularly during the 1830s and 1840s, reflected his deep commitment to preserving the Union and ensuring that American democracy would thrive. Though his efforts were often frustrated by political opponents, Adams continued to speak out on issues of national importance. His opposition to the expansion of slavery, particularly in the territories, was a central focus of his later career. Adams believed that slavery was a moral stain on the nation, and that the United States could never truly be a beacon of liberty and justice until the institution was abolished. In addition to his anti-slavery work, Adams also advocated for the rights of Native Americans and was one of the few prominent political figures of his time to oppose the forced removal of indigenous peoples from their lands. His commitment to justice extended beyond race. He believed that the United States had a responsibility to protect the rights of all its citizens, regardless of their background. Adams also played a key role in shaping the debate on issues of national infrastructure and education. He believed that the federal government should play an active role in promoting the common good, and he pushed for federal funding for projects such as roads, canals, and scientific research. He saw these efforts as vital to the growth of the country and believed that they would help unite the diverse regions of the United States. Adams' advocacy for internal improvements was also tied to his belief in the importance of an educated citizenry. He saw education as essential for the survival of the Republic and worked to promote educational initiatives that would provide opportunities for all Americans, not just the privileged few. His support for the establishment of the Smithsonian Institution was a key example of his commitment to advancing knowledge and fostering intellectual growth in the United States. Though Adams's presidency was short and often viewed as a failure, his post-presidential years in Congress were marked by a deep sense of purpose and a steadfast commitment to the future of American democracy. His work in Congress, particularly his fight for abolition and civil rights, helped lay the foundation for the political and social changes that would eventually lead to the end of slavery and the expansion of civil rights in the United States. Adams' legacy as a champion of liberty, equality, and justice continues to influence the country to this day. In the 1840s, as the United States neared the brink of civil war, Adams remained a voice for moderation, unity, and the preservation of the Union. His warnings about the dangers of sectionalism and his belief in the importance of national unity were prophetic, as the country would soon be torn apart by the issue of slavery. His commitment to the Union and his belief in the power of government to shape the future of the nation helped define the political landscape of the 19th century and set the stage for the struggles and triumphs that would follow. In 1836, one of the most defining moments of John Quincy Adams' career came when the gag rule was instituted in the U.S. House of Representatives. This rule, passed by Southern members of Congress, was designed to prevent the discussion of slavery on the House floor. It prohibited the presentation or debate of any petitions or resolutions calling for the abolition of slavery. The gag rule was a direct attempt to silence the growing abolitionist movement, particularly in the North, where a growing number of citizens were demanding an end to slavery. Adams, who had spent much of his career advocating for the ideals of liberty and free speech, saw the gag rule as a direct attack on the fundamental rights guaranteed by the First Amendment, the right to petition the government and the right to free speech. To Adams, the gag rule represented a dangerous step toward authoritarianism, and he could not stand by and allow it to pass without resistance. His commitment to the preservation of constitutional rights led him to fight back against the rule in a way that few other politicians were willing to do. Despite the growing opposition to slavery, many members of Congress, particularly from the South, were determined to suppress any discussion of the issue. Slavery was an entrenched institution in the Southern economy, and the Southern states were fearful that any discussion of it in the public sphere would threaten their way of life. They feared that the voices of the abolitionists in the North would stir up unrest and provoke the very divisions that would tear the country apart in the years to come. The gag rule was their attempt to silence those voices. John Quincy Adams, however, refused to be silenced. In defiance of the gag rule, he began to present petitions calling for the abolition of slavery and the recognition of the rights of enslaved people. He argued that Congress had an obligation to address the moral and political question of slavery, and that the gag rule violated the rights of American citizens to petition their government and engage in open debate. His actions led to heated debates and intense political battles as he challenged his colleagues to uphold the principles of democracy and free speech. The battle over the gag rule became one of the defining moments of Adams's later political career. While his efforts were met with fierce resistance, He was unrelenting in his belief that the right to speak freely was paramount to the success of the Republic. The gag rule was a clear example of the dangers of political suppression, and Adams was determined to expose its inherent injustice. His fight for free speech became a rallying cry for those who were committed to the abolition of slavery and the protection of civil liberties. Adams' defiance of the gag rule earned him the ire of many of his fellow lawmakers. Southern representatives, in particular, were angered by his efforts and attacked him both personally and politically. Yet Adams remained resolute in his belief that the gag rule must be overturned, no matter the cost. He was not interested in personal political gain, but in defending the ideals that had founded the United States. His courage in standing up to the rule and his commitment to the constitutional rights of American citizens made him a hero to abolitionists and defenders of civil liberties. In 1844, after years of Adams' persistent efforts, the gag rule was finally repealed. It was a hard-won victory, but it was a significant moment in the fight for abolition and the preservation of free speech in the United States. The end of the gag rule marked a turning point in the national debate over slavery, and it allowed for the issue to be addressed more openly in Congress. Adams' tireless battle against the gag rule demonstrated that one individual's commitment to principle and justice could have a lasting impact on the direction of the nation. The fight for free speech and the abolition of the gag rule was not just about one man's struggle. It was about the defense of fundamental rights that were enshrined in the US Constitution. Adams' actions in the 1830s and 1840s demonstrated the importance of standing up for what is right, even when faced with overwhelming opposition. His fight for free speech was a reminder that democracy depends on the ability of citizens to engage in open, honest debate about the most important issues of the day. Adams's advocacy for the abolition of slavery and his defense of free speech were deeply intertwined. He believed that the United States could not truly be a land of liberty and equality, while it continued to uphold the institution of slavery and suppress discussion of its moral implications. He understood that the fight for abolition was not only about ending an immoral practice, but also about ensuring that the nation remained true to its founding ideals of liberty, equality, and justice for all. As Adams continued his work in Congress, he remained a tireless advocate for the rights of all Americans, regardless of race or background. His commitment to these principles and his ability to challenge the status quo made him one of the most important figures in the abolitionist movement. Adams's efforts in defending free speech and advocating for the abolition of slavery were pivotal in advancing the cause of justice in the United States, and his actions laid the groundwork for the eventual victory of the abolitionist movement in the Civil War. In 1839, John Quincy Adams took on one of the most significant and dramatic legal cases of his career, the Amistad case, a pivotal moment in the fight against slavery. This case brought Adams back into the public eye and allowed him to once again advocate for the principles of liberty and justice that had guided his entire life. It was a moment that would highlight his deep commitment to human rights and his belief in the power of legal and moral argument to shape the course of history. The case began when a group of Africans who had been illegally captured and sold into slavery managed to overpower their captors aboard the Spanish slave ship La Amistad. They took control of the ship and attempted to sail it back to Africa, but they were intercepted by a US naval vessel, which brought the ship to port in Connecticut. The Africans aboard La Amistad were detained, and the question arose as to whether they should be treated as slaves in accordance with the laws of slavery, or as free individuals who had been unlawfully enslaved. The case quickly gained national attention, as it raised critical questions about the institution of slavery, the rights of African individuals, and the legal protections guaranteed to all people under the law. At the heart of the case was a moral question. Were the Africans aboard La Amistad to be treated as property or as free people? The case had the potential to set a major legal precedent that could either strengthen the institution of slavery or challenge it fundamentally. Adams, who had spent much of his career opposing slavery, saw this case as an opportunity to make a profound statement about the United States' commitment to justice. He knew that the outcome of the case would have far-reaching implications, not only for the individuals involved, but also for the broader struggle against slavery in the United States. Adams' participation in the case was both a legal and moral act of resistance to the system of slavery. In 1841, Adams agreed to represent the Africans despite the considerable political risks involved. The case was being heard before the U.S. Supreme Court, and Adams knew that his involvement would attract significant attention, particularly from those who defended slavery. However, he also understood that the case presented a unique opportunity to advocate for the freedom of the enslaved and to challenge the laws that upheld the practice of slavery. Adams presented a passionate and eloquent argument before the Supreme Court, invoking the principles of natural law and human rights. He argued that the Africans had been illegally captured and had the right to freedom. He also pointed out that slavery was a violation of the natural rights of individuals, and he appealed to the court's sense of justice. His arguments were grounded in the belief that all men were created equal, and that the rights to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness were not limited to any one race or nationality. Adams' defense of the Africans was not just a legal strategy. It was a moral argument for the abolition of slavery itself. He framed the case as one of human dignity and justice, asserting that the United States, as a nation founded on the ideals of freedom, could not continue to support the practice of slavery without compromising its moral integrity. The Supreme Court ultimately ruled in favor of the Africans aboard the Amistad, declaring that they had been illegally enslaved and that they were entitled to their freedom. The ruling was a monumental victory for the abolitionist movement and a testament to the power of legal argument in challenging the institution of slavery. The case not only freed the individuals involved, but it also set a precedent for future legal challenges to slavery in the United States. The success of the Amistad case was a personal triumph for John Quincy Adams, who'd worked tirelessly to secure the freedom of the Africans. It was also a significant moment in the broader struggle for the abolition of slavery. The case demonstrated that the fight for freedom could be won through legal and moral means, and it galvanized the abolitionist movement by showing that the law could be used as a tool to challenge the institution of slavery. While the Amistad case did not immediately end slavery in the United States, it was an important step in the long struggle for emancipation. It provided a powerful legal precedent for future challenges to slavery and helped to shift public opinion in the North, where the abolitionist movement was gaining strength. The case also had a profound impact on Adams personally, reaffirming his belief that justice could be achieved through persistence, moral clarity, and the rule of law. The victory in the Amistad case was not only a legal triumph, it was a moral one as well. It reinforced Adams' lifelong commitment to human rights and justice, and it cemented his legacy as one of the most important figures in the fight against slavery in the United States. Though he would not live to see the full abolition of slavery, the Amistad case stands as one of the many milestones in his enduring efforts to secure freedom for all people. As the United States moved toward the 1840s, the question of slavery was rapidly becoming the defining issue of American politics. With tensions between North and South escalating and the abolitionist movement gaining ground, John Quincy Adams remained one of the most influential voices in the fight against the institution. Though he was nearing the end of his life, his unwavering dedication to the cause of liberty, equality, and human rights continued to shape the course of American history. By the time Adams entered his 70s, the political climate was filled with both hope and strife. The abolitionist movement, while growing stronger, faced fierce opposition, particularly from the South. But Adams, despite his age, despite the challenges, continued to take a vocal and uncompromising stance against slavery. His role as a congressman in the 1830s and 1840s brought him face to face with the moral dilemma that had long haunted the United States: the contradiction between the nation's founding ideals of liberty and the reality of slavery. Adams' greatest political struggle in his later years was his relentless fight against the expansion of slavery into new territories. The question of whether slavery would be allowed in the newly acquired lands from the Mexican-American War in the late 1840s divided the country and brought Adams back to his central cause. He believed that the spread of slavery into new territories would not only increase the power of the slaveholding South, but would also undermine the very principles on which the United States had been founded. He saw the expansion of slavery as a direct threat to American freedom and democracy. Despite the intense opposition from pro-slavery forces, Adams remained resolute in his belief that slavery was not just a political issue, it was a moral one. He refused to accept the status quo and argued that the United States must reconcile its actions with its founding principles. He did not shy away from condemning the moral stain of slavery, viewing it as a betrayal of the very ideals of freedom and justice that had defined the nation. Adams also became a staunch advocate for the rights of African Americans, long before the broader civil rights movement took hold in the 20th century. His efforts to end slavery were not merely focused on legal arguments or political maneuvers. They were deeply rooted in his belief in the fundamental dignity and equality of all human beings. Adams' vocal opposition to slavery was part of a broader vision for an America where all people, regardless of their race or background, could enjoy the rights and freedoms that were enshrined in the nation's founding documents. At the same time, Adams continued his struggle to address the divisiveness that was threatening to tear the nation apart. He understood that the country was on the brink of civil war, and he worked tirelessly to prevent that conflict through diplomacy and reasoned argument. He believed that the Union was the nation's most precious asset, and that the preservation of the United States as a unified republic was essential for the survival of democracy itself. In the face of growing sectionalism and the rising tide of pro-slavery sentiment, Adams remained hopeful that dialogue and compromise could prevent the nation from descending into war. Though his efforts were often met with frustration, Adams' voice in Congress was a beacon for those who sought to preserve the principles of freedom and equality. His speeches, petitions, and acts of defiance against the gag rule, slavery, and injustice were the actions of a man deeply committed to the moral and intellectual underpinnings of the American Republic. Adams never ceased advocating for a more just and equitable nation, even when the road ahead seemed uncertain and fraught with conflict. His work in Congress during these final years was marked by an intense dedication to public service. Despite the personal toll it took on him, Adams' health had begun to decline in the 1840s, yet he continued to serve in the House of Representatives, advocating for the causes he believed in, even as he grew weaker with age. His actions in Congress were not just the work of a seasoned politician, they were the actions of a man driven by a deep sense of moral duty. As the 1840s came to a close, John Quincy Adams found himself increasingly frustrated by the lack of progress on the issues that mattered most to him. While the abolitionist movement was growing stronger, it still faced fierce opposition, and the political establishment was slow to act on the issue of slavery. The moral force of his arguments could not always sway the tide of history, but Adams' courage in standing up to injustice, even when the odds were against him, left a lasting imprint on the nation's conscience. By the time Adams passed away in 1848, he had fought a tireless battle for liberty and equality. Though he did not live to see the ultimate triumph of the abolitionist cause, his contributions were instrumental in paving the way for the eventual end of slavery. His legacy is one of unwavering dedication to the ideals of the American Revolution, freedom, justice, and equality for all. Through his work, he ensured that the moral question of slavery would not be forgotten, and that the struggle for freedom and civil rights would continue in the years to come. As John Quincy Adams entered the final year of his life, he continued to demonstrate the unwavering dedication that had marked his entire career. Despite his declining health, Adams remained in Congress, where he had served for the better part of 2 decades. His commitment to public service was a testament to his deep belief in the responsibility of the government to serve the people. For Adams, age and illness were no excuse to abandon his principles or his country. In the winter of 1848, Adams was already in his 80s, a man whose health had deteriorated, yet whose resolve remained as strong as ever. He continued to attend sessions of the House of Representatives, even as his strength waned. He took his seat in the chamber, fully aware of the battles he had fought throughout his career, and of the struggles yet to come for his country. His mind, though frail, remained sharp, and he was determined to continue fighting for the causes he had championed for most of his life. On February 21st, 1848, John Quincy Adams took his place in the House chamber once more, this time to engage in a debate. His body, however, had begun to betray him. In the midst of a discussion on the country's ongoing issues, particularly slavery and the expansion of the Union, Adams suddenly collapsed at his desk. He was carried from the chamber, stricken by a stroke. But he had one last opportunity to engage with the very institution he had served for so long. Though Adams did not pass away immediately, the stroke left him gravely ill. For 2 more days he lingered in the company of his family and colleagues. His death on February 23, 1848, while still in Washington, marked the end of an era. His passing was not just the loss of a statesman, but the loss of a moral compass for the country, one who had fought relentlessly for the ideals of liberty and equality. The events surrounding his death were met with a profound sense of national mourning. In the House, where Adams had spent years tirelessly advocating for justice, his colleagues expressed their deep respect for the man who had been a voice of moral clarity in a time of division. His death marked the end of a remarkable life spent in the service of the country, but it also reminded the nation of the battle still to be fought in the fight for freedom and civil rights. Adams' final days in Congress were a symbol of his lifelong commitment to duty. Despite his declining health, he never ceased to engage in the public debates that had shaped his career. His final moments in the House chamber were not just a physical collapse, but the symbolic end of a tireless effort to keep the United States true to its founding ideals. Even as the nation struggled with divisions over slavery, Adams remained determined to ensure that the country would live up to its moral obligations. In the days following his death, the outpouring of grief from both friends and political adversaries underscored the respect and admiration Adams had earned throughout his career. While his presidency may have been viewed as unsuccessful by some, his legacy as a diplomat, a congressman, and an abolitionist would continue to shape the nation. His unwavering dedication to his principles, even in the face of personal and political challenges, left an indelible mark on the future of the United States. Adams' work in Congress had not only been a fight for his own political vision, but also a battle for the soul of the nation. His efforts to end slavery, preserve the Union, and expand civil rights were struggles that would not be fully realized in his lifetime. Yet his courage and intellectual rigor served as a foundation for future generations of reformers. The ideals he championed would later find fruition in the Civil War and the eventual abolition of slavery through the 13th Amendment. John Quincy Adams' final act in Congress, his struggle to engage in the debates that would shape the future of the nation, symbolized his lifelong belief that public service was a sacred duty. His legacy of moral clarity and intellectual rigor would continue to inspire those who sought to uphold the ideals of liberty and equality in the face of adversity. John Quincy Adams' life was not just a series of political achievements or diplomatic successes. It was a testament to his unwavering moral convictions. From a young age, Adams was instilled with a deep sense of duty, justice, and righteousness. Raised by parents who were themselves deeply committed to the ideals of independence and liberty, Adams grew up with a powerful sense of purpose that would guide him throughout his life. His actions, both in public office and as a private citizen, reflected his commitment to the moral principles that he believed were essential to the survival of the nation. Adams' moral compass was shaped by his early experiences, particularly his time abroad in Europe. As a child, he travelled with his father, John Adams, who was serving as a diplomat during the American Revolution. In Europe, young John Quincy Adams observed firsthand the political struggles and injustices of the time. He saw the exploitation of individuals and the oppressive systems that governed European monarchies, and he developed a profound belief in the power of self-government and the importance of individual liberty. His early exposure to the complexities of international politics furthered his understanding of how moral principles and political power intersect. As Adams grew older, he became increasingly convinced that the United States had a unique role to play in the world. He believed that the nation's founding ideals, freedom, equality, and justice, were not just theoretical principles but values that must be upheld through action. He saw the United States as a beacon of hope for the world, a nation founded on the belief that all men are created equal and endowed with certain inalienable rights. It was this vision that drove much of his political and diplomatic career. One of the defining features of Adams' career was his unwavering opposition to slavery. He saw slavery not just as a political issue but as a moral stain on the nation. His commitment to ending slavery was rooted in his deep belief that slavery violated the very principles on which the United States was founded. For Adams, the nation could not truly claim to be a land of liberty and justice, while it continued to allow the enslavement of human beings. His opposition to slavery was not just a matter of political expediency. It was a moral imperative that shaped his entire public life. Adams was also deeply committed to the rights of Native Americans. He understood that the United States' treatment of indigenous peoples was another moral failure that contradicted the ideals of liberty and equality. He consistently spoke out against the forced removal of Native Americans from their lands, particularly during the era of Indian removal policies in the 1830s. Adams believed that the federal government had a responsibility to protect the rights of Native Americans and to ensure that they were treated with dignity and respect. His advocacy for Native American rights was an extension of his broader belief in justice for all people, regardless of race or background. Throughout his career, Adams was often at odds with the prevailing political winds. His moral convictions frequently put him in conflict with those who sought to preserve the status quo. His opposition to the expansion of slavery into new territories, his defiance of the gag rule in Congress, and his vocal criticism of policies that he believed were unjust, all made him a divisive figure. Yet Adams never wavered in his belief that public service was about more than political gain. It was about doing what was right, even when it was difficult or unpopular. Adams' moral clarity was evident not only in his political positions but also in his personal life. He was a man of principle, dedicated to his family and his country. He viewed his work as a public servant not as a personal ambition, but as a moral duty. He believed that it was his responsibility to use his talents and position to advance the cause of liberty, equality, and justice. His integrity and dedication to his values earned him the respect of many, even those who disagreed with his political views. One of the most powerful aspects of Adams' moral conviction was his belief in the importance of education. He saw education as essential for the advancement of society and the preservation of freedom. Adams believed that a well-educated citizenry was vital for the health of the Republic, and that the federal government had a responsibility to support education for all. His support for the establishment of institutions like the Smithsonian Institution reflected his belief that knowledge and intellectual development were foundational to the nation's future success. In the face of political adversity, personal challenges, and the growing divisions within the country, Adams never lost sight of the moral principles that guided his life. His unwavering commitment to justice and his dedication to his country made him a man ahead of his time. His efforts to end slavery, his advocacy for the rights of marginalized groups, and his belief in the power of education to shape the future of the nation helped lay the groundwork for the reforms that would come in the years following his death. Adams's legacy is a reminder of the power of moral conviction in public life. His example shows that, even in the face of overwhelming opposition, one man's commitment to justice and equality can make a lasting impact. His life was defined by a deep sense of duty, a dedication to the principles of liberty, and an unwavering belief in the power of government to promote the common good. John Quincy Adams' moral clarity and his commitment to doing what was right, regardless of the political consequences, continue to serve as a guiding light for those who seek to build a more just and equitable society. John Quincy Adams' contributions to the intellectual and educational landscape of the United States were profound, reflecting his deep belief in the power of education to shape the future of the nation. In an era when formal education was not universally accessible and political ideologies were often driven by regional interests, Adams remained steadfast in his conviction that a well-informed citizenry was essential to the survival of the American Republic. His intellectual legacy would continue to influence the nation's educational development long after his death. Adams' passion for education was rooted in his belief that the nation's strength came not only from its political institutions or military power, but from the intellectual development of its people. As president, Adams envisioned a system of national education that would foster not only a more enlightened populace, but a more cohesive society, one that transcended the sectional divides of the day. His vision extended beyond traditional schooling to include scientific and cultural advancements that could propel the nation forward. One of the most notable aspects of Adams' advocacy for education was his work to promote the advancement of scientific research and intellectual endeavors. During his time in office, he supported federal funding for scientific institutions, believing that the nation's future prosperity was tied to intellectual progress. He advocated for the establishment of the Smithsonian Institution, an institution that would serve as a center for scientific and cultural research. This was a revolutionary idea at the time, and it reflected Adams' understanding that the government had a vital role to play in fostering intellectual growth. In addition to his support for scientific institutions, Adams also believed in the importance of public education. He was one of the earliest champions of federal funding for education, understanding that a democracy depended on its citizens being educated about their rights and responsibilities. At the time, education was primarily a state responsibility, but Adams saw the federal government as a potential force for good in ensuring access to quality education for all. Though his efforts to establish a national system of education were largely unsuccessful during his lifetime, his advocacy helped lay the groundwork for future educational reforms. Adams was also a firm believer in the importance of the humanities, literature, history, philosophy, and the arts as part of a well-rounded education. He understood that these disciplines were not mere luxuries or academic pursuits. They were essential to understanding the world and one's place within it. He believed that an education in the humanities would help foster the moral and intellectual virtues necessary for responsible citizenship and leadership. This perspective would later be reflected in the broader intellectual culture of the United States, as higher education began to expand and liberal arts colleges gained prominence. Despite his strong belief in education, Adams was acutely aware of the political and social obstacles that hindered educational progress in his time. At the federal level, there was little support for a national education system, and many states were slow to establish public schools. Additionally, the political climate of the era was marked by growing sectionalism, which made it difficult to create policies that would benefit all Americans. Nevertheless, Adams never abandoned his vision. He believed that education was one of the cornerstones of democracy, and he was willing to challenge the prevailing attitudes to ensure that future generations of Americans would have the tools necessary to engage in civic life. Throughout his career, Adams was deeply committed to the idea that education should not be limited to a privileged few, but should be available to all citizens, regardless of their social or economic status. His belief in equal access to education was closely tied to his broader commitment to equality and civil rights. Though he was unable to fully realize his vision during his lifetime, his work helped to plant the seeds for the broader educational reforms that would come in the 19th and 20th centuries. As a congressman in his later years, Adams continued to push for educational reforms, often working behind the scenes to support institutions of higher learning and the advancement of knowledge. He was especially committed to ensuring that education was not just for the elite, but was available to all who sought it. This was an extension of his belief that education was a vital tool for fostering civic responsibility and moral leadership. Adams' legacy in the realm of education can also be seen in his personal example. His intellectual curiosity was boundless, and his dedication to learning never ceased. Even as an elderly man, he continued to study and engage with the world's ideas. His speeches, writings, and letters demonstrate an unwavering commitment to the pursuit of knowledge and understanding. His legacy as an intellectual leader, therefore, extended far beyond the policies he championed or the institutions he supported. It was reflected in the way he lived his life. With a constant quest for knowledge, an openness to new ideas, and a deep respect for the power of the human mind, Adams' intellectual legacy was not just about the specific policies or programs he promoted. It was about the way he viewed the role of knowledge and education in shaping the future of the country. For Adams, education was the key to preserving the Republic and ensuring that it lived up to its founding ideals. His advocacy for the expansion of education, for the promotion of intellectual inquiry, and for the moral development of citizens provided a blueprint for future generations of Americans who would continue to build on the foundation he helped lay. John Quincy Adams was, without a doubt, one of the most complex figures in American history. His political career spanned several decades, during which he witnessed and helped shape the major transformations of the United States. Though his presidency was marred by political opposition, his influence in shaping the nation's future, particularly in the realms of diplomacy, abolition, and civil rights, cannot be overstated. His intellectual rigor, moral clarity, and commitment to his ideals made him a figure ahead of his time. Yet, he was also a man deeply enmeshed in the political realities of his era, where ideological differences often turned into bitter personal conflicts. Adams's presidency from 1825 to 1829 is often regarded as a failure, largely because of the political climate that surrounded it. In many ways, it was a reflection of his inability to navigate the increasingly populist currents of American politics. The 1824 election, which saw Adams win the presidency despite losing the popular vote and receiving fewer electoral votes than Andrew Jackson, left a lasting stain on his political reputation. Jackson and his supporters accused Adams of making a corrupt bargain with Henry Clay, a charge that would haunt Adams throughout his time in office and beyond. As a result, his presidency was fraught with partisan divisions and personal animosities, which overshadowed his attempts to promote a vision of national unity. Despite the challenges he faced, Adams's presidency was not without accomplishment. His administration is most notable for its emphasis on internal improvements, such as building infrastructure, promoting education, and advancing scientific research. Adams believed that a strong, centralized federal government could play a significant role in fostering the country's growth. His support for projects like the creation of the National University and federal funding for roads and canals reflected his belief that the government had a duty to promote the general welfare of its citizens. These ideas, though controversial at the time, would later be embraced by future generations of Americans and would lay the foundation for the expansion of the nation's infrastructure in the 19th century. Adams's focus on education and science was part of a larger vision for the country's intellectual and cultural growth. He recognized that a thriving democracy depended on an educated citizenry, and he worked to establish institutions that would foster learning and innovation. His support for the Smithsonian Institution was a critical part of this vision. Though he did not live to see the full realization of these projects, his advocacy for federal investment in intellectual and scientific pursuits would have a lasting impact on the development of American society. Beyond his presidency, Adams' political career became more defined by his role as a congressman. After his defeat in the 1828 election, Adams returned to public life as a member of the U.S. House of Representatives. His time in Congress was marked by his unwavering commitment to the abolition of slavery. He became one of the most vocal and unyielding critics of the institution, using his position to introduce petitions, deliver speeches, and confront the political establishment on the moral and political issues of slavery. His defense of human rights and freedom was an extension of his lifelong belief that the United States could not be a nation of liberty while allowing the enslavement of human beings. Adams' staunch opposition to slavery made him a hero to abolitionists, but it also made him a target of pro-slavery factions, particularly in the South. His willingness to speak out against slavery, even when it was politically dangerous, solidified his legacy as one of the leading voices in the fight for emancipation. He was not content to merely criticize slavery in the abstract. He believed that action was necessary to address the nation's moral failure. His legal arguments, particularly in the Amistad case, and his consistent calls for the abolition of slavery helped to shift the national conversation and lay the groundwork for the eventual abolition of the institution. In addition to his advocacy for abolition, Adams was a champion for the rights of marginalized groups. His defense of Native American rights, his vocal opposition to the Indian Removal Act, and his commitment to civil rights for all Americans positioned him as a progressive voice in an era marked by deep divisions. His advocacy was rooted in his belief that the United States could not fulfill its promise of liberty and justice if it denied basic rights to entire groups of people. Though Adams was often at odds with the prevailing political currents of his time, his legacy as a public servant is profound. His efforts to promote education, advance scientific research, fight slavery, and uphold the principles of the American Revolution established him as one of the most important political figures in American history. His intellectual and moral vision for the nation, though unfulfilled during his lifetime, laid the foundation for future political movements that would transform the United States in the years to come. John Quincy Adams was a figure who transcended the narrow confines of his own time. His vision for the United States was one of progress, equality, and justice, values that remain central to the nation's identity. His impact on American politics, though often overshadowed by the successes of others, was profound. His steadfast adherence to his moral convictions, even in the face of overwhelming opposition, made him a model of leadership for generations of Americans to follow. John Quincy Adams, throughout his career, was deeply concerned with the expansion of the United States. His views on territorial growth were shaped by his commitment to the principles of liberty and the idea that the United States should be a nation that upheld the rights of all its citizens. However, he also understood that territorial expansion came with significant challenges, both practical and moral. As the US grew during the 19th century, Adams played a crucial role in navigating the complexities of expansion, particularly in terms of the political and diplomatic ramifications. Adams's role in the acquisition of Florida from Spain in the Adams-Honest Treaty of 1819 was one of his most significant diplomatic achievements. The acquisition of Florida was seen as necessary for national security, as the region was a haven for runaway slaves and Native American tribes that posed a threat to the southern states. Adams, serving as Secretary of State under President James Monroe, negotiated a treaty that not only secured Florida for the United States, but also resolved territorial disputes between the US and Spain. The treaty marked a significant moment in the US's expansion, as it helped solidify the nation's southern border and affirm the Monroe Doctrine, which asserted that the Western Hemisphere was closed to European colonization. Adams was not only focused on territorial acquisition, but also on the political implications of expansion. He recognized that any expansion into new territories would have profound consequences, particularly in the context of slavery. The spread of slavery into new territories was a divisive issue that would come to dominate American politics in the decades that followed. Adams, as a strong opponent of slavery, was concerned about the extension of the institution into new lands. He saw the expansion of slavery as a moral and political threat to the Republic, believing that it would undermine the nation's commitment to liberty and equality. In addition to the question of slavery, Adams also understood the importance of diplomacy in managing the expansion of the United States. He played a key role in negotiating treaties with foreign powers that would shape the future of the country. One of his notable diplomatic achievements was his involvement in the Treaty of 1818, which established the border between the United States and Canada along the 49th parallel, ensuring peaceful relations between the two nations. Adams's diplomatic skill helped the United States avoid conflict with European powers and maintain a stable international position during a time of rapid territorial growth. Adams' views on territorial expansion were not purely focused on gaining new lands. He also believed that the US should honor its commitments to existing inhabitants, particularly Native Americans. He was a vocal opponent of the Indian Removal Act, which called for the forced relocation of Native American tribes to lands west of the Mississippi River. Although he was not always successful in his efforts to prevent the removal of indigenous peoples, Adams's stance against the policy reflected his deep belief in justice and the protection of human rights. He saw the forced removal of Native Americans as a violation of their basic rights and a betrayal of the nation's founding ideals. As the United States expanded, the question of whether new territories would permit slavery became a growing concern. Adams recognized that the expansion of slavery would deepen the nation's divisions and create a moral and political crisis that could tear the Union apart. He was determined to fight against the extension of slavery, even as political pressures and economic interests pushed for its expansion. His battle against the spread of slavery into new territories became a central aspect of his work in Congress, where he continued to advocate for the abolition of slavery until the end of his life. In the 1840s, as the United States expanded into new territories following the Mexican-American War, Adams remained a vocal critic of the war and the idea of territorial expansion through military force. He believed that the nation should not use war as a tool for territorial acquisition, and that any expansion must be done in a way that respected the rights of all peoples. His opposition to the Mexican-American War was grounded in his belief that the United States should never be a conqueror nation, and that the country's moral and political future depended on avoiding unnecessary military conflicts. The United States' westward expansion, fueled by the belief in manifest destiny, would ultimately lead to the Civil War. Adams, though he did not live to see the war, understood the dangers of unchecked expansion and the deep divisions it would create. His warnings about the future of the Union, particularly in relation to the issue of slavery, proved prescient. While Adams worked tirelessly to keep the nation united, his death in 1848 marked the end of an era, and the political and moral struggles over the future of the United States would soon culminate in the outbreak of the Civil War. John Quincy Adams' role in the expansion of the United States was marked by a careful balance between the nation's need for security and prosperity and his unwavering commitment to justice and equality. His diplomacy, opposition to slavery, and advocacy for the rights of Native Americans reflected his belief in the nation's responsibility to act in accordance with its founding ideals. As the United States grew, Adams' vision for the country, shaped by his deep sense of moral duty, left a lasting legacy that continued to influence the nation long after his death. Throughout his political career, John Quincy Adams was deeply concerned with the growing sectionalism that was dividing the United States. The issues of slavery, states' rights, and territorial expansion were causing rifts between the North and the South, and Adams, ever the committed Unionist, feared that these divisions could tear the nation apart. The years leading up to the Civil War were filled with political and moral struggles, and Adams found himself at the center of the debate, advocating for a more just and unified America, even when it seemed that the country was drifting toward inevitable conflict. Adams understood that the strength of the United States lay in its unity. He believed that the Republic's survival depended on the cooperation of the states and the preservation of the Union. In his later years, as tensions between the North and South mounted, he worked tirelessly to prevent the country from succumbing to the forces of disunion. His opposition to the expansion of slavery was not just about moral outrage. It was also about maintaining the unity of the nation. The Missouri Compromise of 1820 had temporarily settled the issue of slavery in the newly acquired territories, but by the time Adams returned to Congress in 1831, the debate over the future of slavery had reignited. The annexation of Texas, the Mexican-American War, and the acquisition of new territories raised the question of whether slavery would be allowed to expand into these new lands. Adams, who had always been a staunch opponent of slavery, saw the potential for the extension of the institution to further deepen the nation's divisions. Adams' political philosophy was rooted in a belief in the nation's moral responsibility to uphold its founding principles of liberty and equality. He feared that the expansion of slavery into the territories would perpetuate the nation's hypocrisy, as it would create a political structure that allowed the enslavement of people in a country founded on the ideal that all men are created equal. Adams was resolute in his belief that slavery was a moral evil and that the United States could not truly call itself a land of freedom and justice while it continued to uphold such an institution. One of Adams' most significant acts in opposition to slavery came during his time in Congress, when he began to lead the fight against the gag rule. The gag rule, which was passed in 1836, sought to prevent the discussion of anti-slavery petitions on the floor of the House of Representatives. Adams, who was determined to give a voice to those advocating for the abolition of slavery, defied the gag rule by presenting anti-slavery petitions to Congress. His actions led to a prolonged battle over free speech in Congress and made him a target of pro-slavery forces, particularly in the South. Adams' fierce opposition to slavery extended beyond the political arena. He also recognized the moral and ethical implications of slavery on the nation's character. His deep convictions about liberty and equality led him to support the abolitionist movement and to stand as a moral voice in defense of those who were oppressed. He understood that the fight against slavery was not just a political struggle, but a fight for the very soul of the nation. As the debate over slavery intensified in the 1840s, Adams became increasingly concerned about the future of the Union. The nation was heading toward a crisis, and Adams knew that the deep divisions over slavery and territorial expansion could eventually lead to war. His warning about the dangers of disunion, however, went largely unheeded, as the political forces driving the country toward war seemed unstoppable. Despite his warnings, the nation continued to expand, and slavery continued to spread into new territories, deepening the divisions between the North and South. Adams' struggle to preserve the Union was also reflected in his staunch opposition to the Indian Removal Act of 1830. He saw the forced relocation of Native American tribes from their ancestral lands as another example of the nation's moral failure. Adams understood that the removal of Native Americans was not just an issue of territorial expansion, it was an issue of human rights. He was one of the few political figures at the time who spoke out against the policy, recognizing that the United States had a responsibility to protect the rights and dignity of all its citizens, including Native Americans. Throughout the 1830s and 1840s, as the sectional divide deepened, Adams remained committed to the Union. His belief that the nation must stand together, despite its differences, drove his political actions. Even as slavery and states' rights became increasingly divisive issues, Adams continued to argue for the preservation of the United States as a unified republic. His advocacy for a more just and equitable nation, though not fully realized in his lifetime, provided the moral foundation for the future struggles of the abolitionist movement and the eventual reunification of the country. John Quincy Adams' dedication to preserving the Union and his efforts to address the moral crisis of slavery make him a key figure in the history of the United States. His refusal to compromise on the fundamental principles of liberty and justice laid the groundwork for the political and social movements that would eventually bring about the abolition of slavery and the preservation of the Union. Though he did not live to see the full resolution of the nation's moral and political struggles, his contributions to the fight for justice and equality left a lasting legacy that would shape the course of American history. John Quincy Adams passed away on February 23, 1848, leaving behind a legacy that would only become fully appreciated with the passage of time. At the moment of his death, many of his contributions were still unfulfilled, and the struggles he'd fought for, abolition, the preservation of the Union, the promotion of education, and civil rights for marginalized groups, were ongoing. Yet, in retrospect, his life's work stands as one of the cornerstones of American political and moral progress. Adams' legacy, though marred by the bitter political battles of his time, would come to be recognized as a testament to his unwavering commitment to principle and his profound belief in the potential of the United States to live up to its founding ideals. His dedication to justice, equality, and liberty was not only reflected in the policies he championed, but in the way he lived his life. His refusal to compromise on his moral convictions, even in the face of overwhelming opposition, has made him a model of integrity and courage. In his lifetime, John Quincy Adams often struggled against political and social forces that seemed insurmountable. His presidency, which many saw as ineffective and divisive, was the backdrop to his later work in Congress, where he became a leading figure in the abolitionist movement. His opposition to slavery and his refusal to allow the issue to be swept under the rug by political expediency laid the foundation for the eventual abolition of slavery in the United States. Adams' advocacy in favor of the enslaved, his defiance of the gag rule, and his defense of free speech showed his deep commitment to the moral and ethical principles that shaped his political worldview. His work in Congress also highlighted another important facet of his legacy: his dedication to the preservation of the Union. Adams understood that slavery was not just a moral issue, it was a national issue, one that threatened to divide the country. His warnings about the dangers of sectionalism, his calls for national unity, and his belief in a strong, unified federal government marked him as one of the most forward-thinking politicians of his time. Even though the Civil War loomed on the horizon, Adams worked tirelessly to ensure that the nation would remain true to its ideals, and that all Americans would be able to enjoy the rights and freedoms promised by the Declaration of Independence. Adams' influence on foreign policy was equally significant. As a diplomat, he played a pivotal role in shaping the nation's early international relations, particularly through his role in the Monroe Doctrine. His diplomatic efforts helped solidify the United States' place on the world stage and ensured that the country would assert its independence from European powers. Adams understood that the United States, as a young republic, needed to navigate the complexities of international relations with prudence, diplomacy, and a clear sense of purpose. His foreign policy vision helped the US maintain a degree of autonomy and respect in an often hostile global environment. In addition to his contributions to national and international politics, Adams was also a staunch advocate for education and intellectual growth. His support for the creation of the Smithsonian Institution, his push for federal funding of education, and his advocacy for scientific progress reflect his belief that the future of the United States depended not only on its political and military strength but on its intellectual and cultural development. Adams understood that a well-educated citizenry was essential to the functioning of a healthy democracy, and that knowledge and inquiry would propel the nation into the future. After his death, the United States continued to evolve and transform in ways Adams had hoped for but did not live to see fully realized. The Civil War erupted in 1861, and slavery was ultimately abolished in 1865 with the 13th Amendment, a triumph for the abolitionist movement to which Adams had contributed so much. The Union was preserved, and his warnings about the dangers of disunion were validated. His advocacy for civil rights and equality, though not fully realized in his time, laid the groundwork for the broader civil rights movements that would unfold in the 20th century. Adams' legacy also endured in the realm of education. The institutions he helped promote, such as the Smithsonian and others supporting scientific research and intellectual growth, would become cornerstones of American culture and innovation. His belief in education as the foundation of a thriving democracy became a central tenet of US educational policy as the nation grew in size and influence. Despite the political opposition he faced throughout his career, John Quincy Adams' posthumous recognition has grown. Today, he is remembered as a visionary, a man who stood firm in the face of adversity, guided by an unwavering belief in the moral ideals of liberty, equality, and justice. His legacy, while often overlooked in favor of other historical figures of his time, is one that continues to inspire generations of Americans who seek to build a more just and equitable society. Adams' life serves as a reminder that public service is not just about political gain or personal advancement. It is about upholding the values of freedom and justice, even when the road is difficult and the future uncertain. His steadfast commitment to those ideals, both in times of peace and conflict, remains a beacon of hope for anyone seeking to make a positive difference in the world. John Quincy Adams' life was a remarkable journey of intellect, moral conviction, and dedication to public service. His legacy is not just found in the treaties he negotiated or the policies he enacted, but in the principles he upheld throughout his life: justice, liberty, equality, and a deep commitment to the ideals of the American Revolution. Though his presidency was often overshadowed by the rise of Andrew Jackson and his populist politics, Adams' unwavering adherence to his core beliefs continued to shape the nation long after his death. His early years, shaped by the influence of his parents, John Adams and Abigail Adams, instilled in him a strong sense of duty and an understanding of the importance of education, diplomacy, and moral integrity. These values became the guiding principles throughout his career. As a diplomat, president, congressman, and abolitionist, Adams constantly sought to shape the United States in a way that would honor its founding ideals. One of the most defining aspects of Adams' legacy is his commitment to the abolition of slavery. His opposition to slavery, even when it was deeply unpopular, laid the groundwork for the eventual end of the institution in the United States. His work in Congress, particularly his battle against the gag rule, his defense of enslaved individuals in the Amistad case, and his tireless advocacy for human rights, made him a key figure in the abolitionist movement. Though he did not live to see the full realization of his vision, his work helped to create the moral foundation for the eventual passage of the 13th Amendment. Equally important was Adams's dedication to preserving the Union. While the nation was increasingly divided over issues like slavery and states' rights, Adams remained committed to the idea of a united republic. He understood that the strength of the United States lay in its ability to uphold the principles of democracy and equality, and he fought to ensure that these principles would continue to guide the nation, even as political tensions rose. Adams's vision for the United States was one where the government would play an active role in promoting the general welfare. His support for internal improvements, the establishment of educational institutions like the Smithsonian, and his efforts to expand access to knowledge and scientific inquiry were all part of his broader belief that a strong nation was one that fostered intellectual and cultural growth. His vision of a nation where education and innovation flourished would lay the groundwork for the United States' rise as a global leader in science and technology. Perhaps one of Adams' most enduring contributions was his unwavering belief in the power of individual rights and freedoms. Whether advocating for the abolition of slavery, defending the rights of Native Americans, or speaking out against the abuses of political power, Adams was a tireless advocate for justice. His commitment to the principle that all people, regardless of race or background, deserved equality and dignity continues to resonate in the struggles for civil rights today. John Quincy Adams also left an indelible mark on U.S. foreign policy. As Secretary of State under President Monroe, he crafted the Monroe Doctrine, which declared the Western Hemisphere off-limits to European colonization. This bold declaration would serve as the foundation of U.S. foreign policy for much of the 19th century and helped establish the United States as a respected power on the global stage. His work in diplomacy helped ensure that the United States could maintain its independence and sovereignty in a rapidly changing world. Though his presidency was short and filled with personal and political challenges, Adams' post-presidential years in Congress became the defining period of his career. His battle against slavery and his passionate advocacy for the rights of all people solidified his place as one of the most important political figures in American history. His commitment to freedom, justice, and equality, even in the face of overwhelming opposition, serves as a model for all those who strive to make the world a more just place. John Quincy Adams' life reminds us that true leadership is not about popularity or personal gain, but about adhering to one's principles, even when the road is difficult. His legacy is not just one of political achievements or diplomatic successes, but one of moral clarity and moral courage. His belief that a government should serve the people, promote the common good, and uphold the values of liberty and equality continues to inspire generations of Americans. As we reflect on the life of John Quincy Adams, we are reminded of the ideals that have shaped the United States: justice, equality, freedom, and a commitment to the common good. His legacy, though often overlooked in his time, has proven to be an enduring force in the history of the nation, and his vision for a more just and equitable America continues to guide the struggles for freedom and civil rights that continue today.